Mom attends son's wedding, realizes bride is her daughter. She took her hands into her own and welcomed her into the family. That's when she saw it. The unusual birthmark that made her stomach drop and her smile freeze. She searched into the eyes of the beautiful young girl that was about to be her son's wife. Her heart pounded as recognized the familiarity of her features. Martha lived in the small town of Fargo, North Carolina, and always loved hearing from her son, Mark. She was excited about his wedding that was coming up. Ever since Mark moved to New York for better job opportunities 4 years ago, she hadn't seen him. She knew he didn't have the time to visit her since he was always busy. But Martha understood that her son needed to do it, and as long as he was happy she didn't mind. She understood that New York was an expensive place to live in. After half a year of living in New York, Mark called his mother and told her that he had found a girl. Martha was over the moon that her son had found someone. Every so often Martha would get calls from her son, and they would catch up. One day Mark told her that he was getting married and she was over the moon. Martha prepared for the wedding by looking for a new dress. But she was about to find out that it wasn't the dress that would change things. Martha was very grateful that Mark decided that his wedding would be back in his hometown of Fargo. The two flew in on their wedding day, both eager to get married. Finally, Martha could show her son the dress she had bought and left for the wedding venue to see her new daughter-in-law. But she had no idea what was going to happen. Finally, Martha could meet her daughter-in-law, Holly. She had never met her before, but she had talked with her on the phone before. But she had no idea how their meeting would be. When she got there she hugged her son. She hadn't seen him in 4 years, and now that was finally over. But that's when she saw Holly. Martha hugged her future daughter-in-law and took her hands in hers. That's when she saw something she didn't quite understand. She had no idea that her world was about to be turned upside down. Martha looked down at her new daughter's hands and immediately noticed a peculiar birthmark. She didn't understand until it clicked in her head. Holly saw the surprise in Martha's face and showed concern immediately. What was going on? Martha quickly replied, say that nothing was the matter. But something definitely was wrong, and it wouldn't be the first time she'd seen a birthmark like that. It looked just like the birthmark Martha's daughter had. But she had been missing for years. She shook as she relived the memory. Was she really who she thought she could be? Martha now examined every feature on Holly's face. She made sure to pay careful attention to it all. Could this really be her long-lost daughter? The more she looked at the girl, the more she recognized her. There were too many similarities between the two for it to be a normal coincidence. Was it really her? Martha felt her lips dry out as her heart started to race. She tried to think of an explanation, but knew what her gut feeling told her. But now she felt that she knew the truth and it was too late to hide it. But if she wanted to really prove that her daughter-in-law was actually her daughter, she didn't want to say something that might ruin the perfect day that her son had meticulously planned. It was a huge day for him after all. She didn't want to upset her son like that. This was supposed to be his big day. But even so, she knew that she would have to find out on her own somehow. A light bulb went off in Martha's head. She would ask Holly if she could meet her parents. She knew that they would be the source of it all. Holly smiled and brought her parents over to greet her. They all introduced each other, and then Martha asked if she could take them to the side to talk to them. Martha was still unsure of how she would pose the question to them. She had no idea how her parents would react once she blurted out what she was thinking. She knew that there was no going back. She had to ask her parents after all these years of uncertainty. She didn't care what kind of outcome she was met with afterwards. She drew a deep breath and asked. She knew that time was a sensitive thing at this moment. She tried to be as calm and collected as she could when asking if they had adopted their daughter. But as soon as she asked, she could see their cheerful expressions change into something else. It was apparent that they were hiding something. Martha jumped on their expression and asked what the truth was. Her parents finally told her the truth. She was adopted. But it was a secret that they had never let out, not even to their daughter. They then asked Martha how she knew. Martha didn't give them an answer, but rather further begged them to ask them about her birth parents and what they knew about them. But they seemed to become very nervous before giving the answer. They explained to Martha that they had found Holly wandering the streets 2 decades ago. After no parent came back for her, they decided to take her in and raise her as their own. With more insight into the situation, Martha didn't know what to think anymore. She felt tears welling up into her eyes until she couldn't hold it in anymore. For 20 years Martha had been left to wonder what had happened to her baby girl. She thought she had been kidnapped or something even worse. She had always feared the worst and never considered that she was well looked after by a good family. But when they told Martha they had reported her disappearance to their local police station, Martha felt even worse. Why hadn't they notified her that they had found her missing girl? Her heart sank. But someone else was listening in on the conversation. Holly's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to chat to a circle of friends that was close enough for her to listen in on the conversation between her parents and Martha. She smiled as she pretended to listen to what her friends were saying. All the while she was actually listening to what they were talking about. The three of them were speaking in hushed whispers. "She doesn't know she's adopted," Holly heard her mother say. Between sobs Martha managed to say, "I think she's my biological daughter. I lost her over 20 years ago on a trip in Alabama and never found her again." Holly's mother couldn't believe it. Holly was bewildered by what she had just heard. She turned to look at Martha with huge eyes, tears forming in them. Holly knew she had to confront them now. She walked up to her parents and asked them if everything she had heard was some kind of joke or if it was the truth. They quickly replied. "You were wandering the streets in Alabama. We took you to the police station, but when no one came to get you we had to take you with us," her mom cried. Holly looked at Martha and Martha back at Holly. Everyone was crying at the truth. But things weren't over just yet. Holly looked like a wound up like a toy. But as if something just finally calmed inside her. She accepted the turn of events and opened her arms. Martha smiled and the two of them hugged each other. But what would happen to the wedding now that the truth was out? And what about Martha's son? Everyone was in disbelief over what had just happened. But who knew that their reunion would be a happy one? Things actually turned out for the better. Holly and her fiancé would end up getting married in the end anyway. But how would after everything they had just learned? It turned out that Mark and Holly, despite having sharing a mother, didn't share any blood relations, which meant they could still get married like they wanted to. If the two were related then they wouldn't have been able to get married and the entire wedding would have had to be cancelled. But why weren't they blood related? Luckily, Mark was actually adopted by Martha after she lost Holly. She was heartbroken and knew she had to find someone to fill the void in her heart that ended up being Mark. And with the bride and groom, there was one key difference with how the two grew up. Holly was never told that she was adopted, but Mark did. Martha told him when he asked her directly. He still felt like she was his mother and nothing could ever change that. Martha loved both of her children the same. But how would Mark react when he found out the impossible news? Even though the couple was surprised, to say the least, they were both relieved that at least they weren't related. They were in love and wouldn't let this detail stop them from achieving their dreams together. Holly had gained both a husband and another mother on the same day and was excited to learn more about her heritage and what had happened to her years ago. Holly was clueless about everything. She was just 2 when she was adopted by her parents. Holly had a bad memory and had forgotten a lot about her childhood. But just to be sure the couple decided that they should both get DNA tests anyway. Thankfully they weren't related. But that didn't mean that every question was answered. Holly still couldn't even remember her biological father. Martha frowned and told her he had passed a few years back but was an amazing man. Holly was sad but also happy that she at least found the truth around her origins and her biological mother before it was too late. It was a good ending with her having not only a new husband but a new mother as well.